Good evening, everybody. Today we have Mr. Jitender Tanikella, who is a partner at Acqui-hire, and we have also have Meghmala Singh, who is an associate at TRA. And today we will be discussing something. Today we'll be discussing on something very unique topic, that is on Acqui-hire deals. And let's understand from, I first of all, I would like to welcome Jitender and Villa. Thanks for being here. So like let's try to understand the whole thing. What is an Acqui-hire? What does Acqui-hire deal look like, and what does it mean actually?
All right. So I'd like my colleague Meghmala to can you elaborate that question and so that we discuss the theme at hand today?
Sure. Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank everyone. Thank you for taking out time to join us in this webinar. So as we've been lately witnessing that as the startup ecosystem progresses towards a more mature market, there's been consolidation in this area. A lot of smaller startups are getting acquired by the big players in the market. There are different ways and different types in which this acquisition is being taking place. One such firm is Acqui-hire. So, you think that if you can just share some thoughts on what Acqui-hire means, or
right. So just to as my colleague also shared, this is really about how a startup is acquired. So as you must be witnessing in the market, when you look at the papers these days, you hear about say Freecharge got acquired by Snapdeal, or Facebook or Google. Every other day they acquire different entities. What we are seeing is that startups which have grown mature to a certain level, they are now giving returns to their investors, either by way of being acquired entirely as a company by the buyer, who the acquirer or the buyer. I refer to the acquirer as the buyer during the session, just for simplicity, or by taking over the team of the startup. So that is what the key difference here is. In an Acqui-hire, it's an acquisition, but an acquisition of the talent of the startup. It may involve also acquiring certain assets, such as maybe a particular product design or IP, but it's principally geared towards providing the founders and the key employees of the startup an exit. The buyer's interest is the team. They see potential in the team. They may also see potential in the particular product which that team has been developing in as a means of a vertical which they can integrate. But it is largely about the team itself. And that's what makes it a unique animal as compared to a typical mergers and acquisition transaction. To understand that better, I'd like to just speak a few words about a typical mergers and acquisition transaction. A typical mergers and acquisition transaction, or an M&A transaction as we understand it, involves a buyer company acquiring a seller or a target company. And that acquisition is happening for the purposes of growth or acquisition of technology, or acquisition of particular IPs. And that acquisition may then be concluded as by retaining the seller entity as a subsidiary or as a separate sister company, or ultimately merge itself into the buyer company. That is your typical M&A transaction. In an Acqui-hire, it is about the people. The target being acquired here are the people in that particular startup, and amongst those people is the founders and the key employees, which could be your chief technology officer, the chief operating officer, and product development teams.
So, Jitender, considering the different kinds of parties which are involved in this transaction, what are the key concerns from each side, be the buyer, be the seller, or the founder, investor, or the employees?
Right. So when we now let's come to the anatomy of an Acqui-hire transaction, and this is what we as lawyers, as counsels to our clients, we need to understand what is the nature, what are the parts of this transaction, to be able to then advise our clients, and our clients may be any one of the parties to an acqui-hire transaction. The parties to an acqui-hire transaction are the company itself, the startup from which the acquisition is being, from which the employees are being acquired, the key employees, the founders, the product team, the investors of that startup. So remember that startup is a young company which must have already received certain investments. So in an acqui-hire, the sole and the dominant value of the startup, which is the team, is being acquired, the investors also would need to be compensated. Otherwise, they are left with a company which has no longer any reasonable value in terms of what they had originally invested in. The last but the most important party is, of course, your buyer. So it is the buyer who identifies the acquisition target. It is the buyer based on his demands and his requirements that the price and the commercials of such an acquisition are set. So given that these are the parties, depending on who you're advising, you must try and understand what their concerns are. In the next few minutes, we will discuss about these concerns. I will try and give you a brief overview to help you to try and see what are the thematic issues for each of these parties, which will then help you assess what counsel to give them. Let's start with the investors first. All right, the investors of the startup, they have invested in this company with an expectation of a certain return on their capital when the company itself is acquired or goes through any other exit mode, such as an initial public offering. Example, say, for example, Google, Facebook, they all had initial public offerings which gave returns to their original investors. On the other hand, ICQ or Dropbox, they themselves were acquired by other companies, but again in this acquisition, the shares of the investors were brought, returns were given to them as consideration for the shares. In the acqui-hire, the investor is not getting directly compensated because what is happening is that the team is being acquired. Therefore, as the investors' counsel, you have a very important role to play to protect your investor interests. Typically, any investor, any early stage investor or VC investor in a startup will have something we call affirmative voting rights, which is a veto, a corporate veto on certain transactions. You must first examine whether the constitutional documents of your company have those veto rights in place for the investor, because this becomes an important leverage pin for you to be able to demand that you are compensated accordingly. Secondly, the compensation or the consideration price for the acqui-hire, that should have a component which is a fixed payout to the investors. This can happen in two forms, either as a cash payout to the company, which is then given to the investors as dividend, or it can be of stocks of the buyer. So for instance, if the buyer itself is a valuable company as a Google or a Facebook, they may offer stocks instead of cash to these investors to provide them an exit. Once you are satisfied that the investor is getting a reasonable return or the return he was expecting, then you can advise him on the transaction documents in terms of what are his continuing representations or liabilities. Since in the acqui-hire, the team is being acquired and not the company, the investor should have to make a minimum of any representations and provide any such warranties for the assets being acquired. Second, we have the founders. As the founders, and when I talk about the founders, I will also include the key employees or the key talent being acquired. Now, these are the people who are really the assets who are moving in the transaction. As their counsel, what you need to look out for is, and it is very critical because remember, in an M&A transaction, you are typically moving assets, or IP or goods or inventory. But here it's people. So in an acqui-hire, it is very people-centric, and as a counsel to the actual people getting hired, you need to look out for them in terms of the compensation which they are promised as a part of the acquisition price. Is that competing with what they are currently earning? How is that compensation structured? The buyer will often demand that, say, if he has set a price of 100 for the acqui-hire, he would demand that of that 100, only 10 be paid upfront, but the rest 90 be paid depending on the commitment of the employees acquired, because the buyer needs to know that they are going to stay on. Similarly, the employees, the founders who are being acquired, they need security that they will be continued to be retained in the company in which they are being acquired. Now, this seems like a no-brainer. Why would someone go for an acqui-hire and then fire the employees? But this is the actual truth. Since they are employees, depending on business cycles or business use cases or needs, it is not uncommon that after an acqui-hire, a team is wound up 2 years or 1 year because the company does not need that kind of an engineering pool size anymore. Therefore, it is very important to put on the hat of an employment lawyer. In this case, although it's an M&A, and as an employment lawyer, think about your clients, the key founders, and think about very simple, basic employment terms like what is the conditions of employment being promised, what is the post they're being given, what is the location of their workplace, what are the other benefits, what are the stock benefits they're getting, and how are those stock benefits going to accrue to them. Why is this important? Because if any of these items are not discussed beforehand and crystallized in your transaction documents, unfortunately, the acqui-hire will fail because the key founders or the employees may not continue in that entity because unfortunately no one can be compelled to work. And similarly, on the other hand, the acquiring entity, the buyer, may also relieve these employees. Underlying all this is the acquisition price itself. In an acqui-hire, the acquisition price is closely linked to the employees and to the number of employees who stay on. Therefore, again, very important to look into the employment terms and conditions, make them a part of your transaction document, because the total price which will be paid off, which will be given to the employees, also depends on the number of them who stay on. One suggestion as a counsel to your clients, to the founders, which we often find overlooked, but something you can think about, is ask them to understand from the acquirer who exactly they are looking for. Often the acquirer will make an offer for the entire team, and there is a business economic sense behind it. If they had to go out and look for 10 engineers, it would be a time-consuming process for them. It would also involve training, and there would be a hit and miss. Whereas in an acqui-hire, they are immediately getting access to a talent pool at a slight premium. But the premium is never the same as a complete acquisition itself, right? So it is the buyers has a very focused interest on who he wants to acquire. Your counsel to your clients, who are the founders and key employees, would be that they must insist that the buyer interview them properly, set the expectations straight, and not leave that as a post-closing condition. A post-closing condition is once the transaction documents are executed and some consideration is exchanged. These are conditions which contractually can be fulfilled later. Unfortunately, making this a post-closing condition does not lead to a healthy resolution of the acqui-hire deal itself. Finally, coming to the acquirer. As the acquirer's counsel, you are on the other side of the bench here now, and you need to put on that hat. And it's very simply a competing interest to all the interests which we have just identified right now. For instance, the investors. You really don't want to pay the investors. It doesn't make sense to you. That money you would rather put up as a compensation premium to the incoming employees. So you need to be wise and look out for your client, who is the buyer or the acquirer, and see whether the investor really has any rights by which he can intervene in the transaction. If there is none so and if the investor is marginal, then it may not be necessary for the buyer to compensate him. In fact, the buyer can ask the key founders or the employees who are taking part of this deal to compensate the investor from their own payout. So that is one aspect which you can counsel your client who is the acquirer by trying to protect against a payout to the investor. And as I've just explained, that it is not a question of fairness, it's a question of who pays and how much. So by looking at what rights investor has, one can counsel and at least put the bargain onto the key founders to make the necessary payments to the investors. Then you have to deal with key founders and the key employees themselves. All right. So again, the same things which held true for the key founders and the key employees, they hold equally true for you as well. It is also in your interest to have those terms of employment clear. It's also in your interest to clearly identify the parameters or the performance milestones on the basis of which the compensation or the total acquisition price promised will be released. It is also important for you to get release letters from these employees as to any past claims. That is another critical piece which please get from the employees who are
Jitender, the voice is breaking a little bit.
sorry?
Now it's clear, but it's just broken the last few seconds.
Okay, so when did you lose me?
The employees have to take some release orders.
Right, so we were talking about the acquirer dealing with the employees, and the point we were making there was just as when we were wearing the hat of the employers' council, the same issues also are important for you as the counsel for the acquirer. So the terms of employment, you need to crystallize them before you close the contract. The terms of compensation, again, it is in your interest to crystallize that before you close the contract. Also, you need to understand what is your liability and exposure if these employees whom you have acqui-hired were to leave or to were to start a competing business. So you need to have covenants in place which protect your business interests in this process.
So considering the interest of the parties involved in these transactions is so different from the seller side itself, how do you reconcile their interest while structuring the deal? And how do you roll out the consideration to each of these parties?
So that's an interesting question. So like we have just seen here, there are diverse interests at play. The nature of the transaction is not your typical acquisition of a company, its shares. Therefore, what has evolved and what you see, there are, of course, every transaction is unique to itself, but we can definitely think of a model of an acqui-hire. And the model of the acqui-hire is such: the buyer identifies the team they are to acquire, evaluates the compensation of the team members, puts up a total price of that team. That total price is consisting of two components. One is an immediate payment, which is the incentive for them to leave their current employment and to join your employment. The other is a long-term incentive, which can be in the form of stock or cash compensation, and that is linked to their continued staying with your company and their performance. The entire compensation is entire cash compensation is many times often put up in an escrow, and that escrow is then defined in the contract to be released on the occurrence of certain milestones. So, for instance, 10% is paid out immediately to all the employees to close the acquisition process, and say 20% is paid out after they complete 1 year. Another 40% if there are any engineering or product design milestones or goals, and so on. So this is very common in acqui-hire transactions because an escrow allows that money to be placed in trust with a third party and allows all parties to have comfort, yes, that the money is there, It's not that tomorrow, although I have met my obligations, the acquirer company turns around and says, no, I don't have the cash right now and I can't pay you. So escrow forms a very critical part of that transaction. Other interesting aspects are how do you reward or compensate, continue to compensate the acquired team. One popular model which we see nowadays as well is called the earn-out model. So for the key founders, there might be an additional incentive tied in to the acqui-hire, which is called an earn-out. And earn-out means it simply implies that if the founder continues with the company and meets certain concrete performance goals, then he will be paid additional compensation in the form of cash or stocks.
So, now our next question is: does this involve any specific covenants from side of founders and joint will? So, if you're representing founder, how do you protect their interests?
So, just like we've been through what the founders, what you need to look out for founders in terms of the issues they have. In an acqui-hire, the buyer would often demand of the founder or the key employee, really the team leader, to covenant the staying or the retention of the employees being acquired as a part of the team. That is a tricky covenant because you are essentially asking someone to promise that another person, an individual actor, will do or not do certain things. The way it is structured is you have a monetary incentive. So, of the total compensation price, the part paid to you, you stand to lose some of that part if your team members leave before a certain period. And therefore, you are incentivized to stay, to try and make all efforts to keep your team together.
And what happens to the seller entity once this acquisition is done?
Right, interesting question. So we have the acqui-hire, and after the acqui-hire, what happens to the company, original company, which was founded by the startups, by the founders by the startup. So typically, this company is then generally devolved to the investors if they see any other business purpose for it, because it's an entity which already is in place, and they can pivot into other business goals. Or otherwise, internationally, they are mostly wound up. Winding up, as you all know, has been traditionally a long, difficult process in India, but with the new insolvency and winding up laws in place, one expects that you can fast track it and have a quicker resolution to a defunct company.
Yeah, I guess that was it from our side. So if any of these students have any questions, please feel free to ask.
Okay. One of the Okay. So one of the questions that I have is anyways, I'll continue my questions because I can let you know.
Sorry, but your voice is not clear. We're not able to hear.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay. Employment agreements, right? Now, when they are joining in the new acquirer company, so what happens to their existing terms? Like, for example, they have some ESOPs and all this. That get within the package, or they have to hire, they have to cancel all those previous agreements. What things has to be done?
Right, great question, Amartya. That's an important point which should actually fall under the issues you look into when you're advising the reasons for that. As Amartya, as you pointed out, the employees would have existing compensation structures in the company in which they are working with. They would have an ESOP, stocks, bonus, sweat equity, and maybe even bonuses. Typically, all these are disclosed to the buyer during his initial diligence, and the buyer then factors that into the price he has to pay for these employees. So from the buyer's perspective, he tries to price it in and close out those existing obligations. So if there was a bonus to be paid, then it has to be then it will become a part of the price the buyer pays for this year, apart from what he pays for the continuing stay of the employee. This is not so simple in the case of ESOPs and stocks also. All right, and ESOPs and stocks is slightly different because you need to then inquire from your employee or look into the contracts, the ESOP scheme, and the offer letter to understand whether those stocks have actually vested with the employee or not. In many a case, typically vestings go over a certain period, and not all stock is vested immediately or 2-3 period. Vesting can go as long as 8 years. So an employee stands to lose unvested stock at that point, unless he has something which we call accelerated vesting. An accelerated vesting clause predetermines that if the company goes through a change of control or goes through any business acquisition, then all the unvested stocks would immediately vest upon this employee. So that is how these stocks are taken care of, but it needs that clause to be there prior. It cannot be introduced at the stage of the acqui-hire itself, but it is something which, as the council, you can look into and see whether the accelerated vesting clause is there. Another tip I'd like to drop here that the typical accelerated vesting clause does not contemplate acqui-hires, and this is a kind of a miss or a loophole which has led to many a sorrier deal, because at the time of the acqui-hire, the company just comes up and says that the accelerated vesting was not for acqui-hires, it was for a change in control, which implies that the transaction should have been one in which the shares of the company, the majority shareholding of the company, has been acquired. However, if you have accelerated vesting clauses, then the stock would be vested at the acqui-hire stage itself. Typically, what that means for you is that the stock, the value of the stock, will form a part of the compensation price the buyer pays. Because understand that stock itself is of little value now if the entire team is going to the buyer. But being able to claim stocks allows you to present a price to the buyer, and the buyer is also cognizant of that if you continued with the company or the acquisition didn't take place, then you would have 10% stock which was valued at so and so valuation. So they would then accordingly compensate you with stocks in their own company or provide you with a cash compensation.
The discussions with the is generally made by the investors also come into place and discuss.
Now, Amadev, sorry, missed the question.
So I mean to say the acquirer company, would they actually go on and negotiate with the key employees of the target company?
Right.
Is it done by the the company which is getting acquired, their CEOs and the employees, they do it inside within themselves?
So I'll just repeat the question just to understand if I heard it clearly. Is the question that who represents the or who negotiates with the employees in Acqui-hire?
Right.
Okay. So is it so who could it be? It could be the founding team, the founders who do it, or it could be the buyer who does that negotiation. So we've seen both happen. So typically when your acquirer is a big a big company already of name and valuation and repute, the buyer company's HR department steps in at this point in time and starts the discussions with the employees. However, if the acqui-hire is with a company which itself is say not listed or does not have is also yet a growing company, and in this stage, typically the founders of the company who are driving the acqui-hire, they will sit down and negotiate with the employees or discuss the terms with them. But overall, both parties are mostly broadly involved in the process. But this is how we typically see it pan out, depending on the nature of the buyer.
Another thing that has been that is like one thing is acqui-hires are often led to like kill the competition. Is this something correct? What do you think?
Right. So I mean that's again an interesting question, Amartya, and that gets us to the economics of an acqui-hire. So there are arguments on both sides. On the pros of an acqui-hire, it allows for a company to at least call itself acquired. It represents a certain credence in the entrepreneurial world that a team has been taken to a certain level of success. It allows for an exit or some return for the hard work put in by founders and key employees, especially in a market where their product itself, and it happens, means sometimes the product becomes irrelevant by the time it's in development. But while developing the product, you develop so many wonderful technologies. Without an acqui-hire, you're not able to monetize that. However, the negatives of an acqui-hire, which we have seen is, if an acqui-hire is of typically one or two divisions, then believe me, those divisions will be the most important divisions of that company itself. And once that is done, there is very little prospect left for any employees retained. When the acqui-hire happens for the whole company itself, the investors typically may stand to lose a lot because they will not be able to recover the kind of returns they would have made if the company itself, the stock of the company itself, would be acquired. Because when the stock of the company is being acquired, the principal players there are the investors, shareholders, and the buyer. The employees have little or no say. But in this model, the acqui-hire, it is the employees who have the say and who are the assets. On the buyer side, there is a concern regarding acqui-hires that acqui-hires actually go on to demoralize the existing employees of the buyers. Because the existing employees of the buyers themselves may have put in 8 to 10 years to earn a certain stock-based ESOPs or a compensation reward. And they would find that somebody else who started up independently for just 3 or 4 years and has not even developed a product which is gone to market is suddenly being acquired by our company and being paid handsomely for that. So it creates a dissonance between the existing employees and the newly acquired employees. The other aspect to be borne in mind, and certain economic studies point out that in acqui-hires, if the expectations of the employees, and like we discussed earlier, this is a very important thing where even as lawyers, we can help guide the deal by keeping the expectations of the employer and employees clear and crystallized. If those are not wisely met, then your acqui-hired employees will typically not stay longer than the minimum period they are asked to stay to receive their bonus, and it's not a net gain for the company itself.
Okay. I don't have any other questions. Do you have anything more to add to the discussion?
Well made, analysis. So I would just like to add more from a process notes perspective that when you look at an acqui-hire, don't think of it just as an acquisition. Think of the employment-related aspect. And why I stress that again, because it is one of those transactions in which you have to put on a couple of more hats than your corporate transactional lawyer hat. You have to put on your employment lawyer hat. You have to put on your labor litigation kind of a lawyer hat, and think on those perspectives as well. So it's always good to be a part of such a transaction. It is interesting and challenges you. I would urge everybody to try and read up on the economics of such transactions, because they are only like originally Meghala mentioned in the beginning, that this is the consequence of the market evolving. where as the Indian startup market also evolves, we will see different types of exits coming around, and not just your typical IPO exit. You will see different types of ways founders try to monetize their value in the company. So Acqui-hire is one of them, and we see it increasingly happening, especially in the Indian context, because in the Indian context, it's also more so. You have more acqui-hires than acquisitions, because most of the development teams being acquired, the products they're developing are very nascent. Whereas in the developed, the larger markets in the US, you will find acqui-hires, but you will also find the entire company product itself being acquired.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. So, if the audience has any questions, we'll be happy to take them now.
I think that most of the questions that I have received somewhat answered during the period of the webinar. So there is no new question that we have regarding this.
Sure. And if there are any follow-up questions through your medium, we'll be happy to answer on that.
Another request that I have with a few of my students, they want to see a agreement, sample agreements. If you can provide us with a copy of a sample agreement in this kind of deal. That would.
So, I mean, certainly I can, I will try and pull out publicly available acqui-hire agreement, so to speak. But it's on that question, I would also like to mention that in an acqui-hire transaction, apart from the acquisition document itself, you would also have concurrent settlement and employment letters and offer letters. So that's actually it's a great question to come at the end, because it also tells you that what are the kind of deeds and documents which go into such a transaction. So it's not just your central acquisition contract. They are equally important, and often they'll be annexed to this contract. Will be your termination letters, your settlement letters, release letters. So a lot of employment law related what you see typical drafting there. Whereas an M&A transaction, you would have at the core a share purchase document, which is essentially which governs the entire transaction. So certainly, but I'll try and see what document I can present to you. But just to the students, I would like to just inform them that the US Securities Exchange Commission holds a repository of publicly listed companies and their documents. So you will find, and it's a gold mine. Unfortunately, I don't see people using it. It's called the EDGAR. It is a base of all the documents which the listed companies file. So Facebook's, Google's. So when they do acquisitions, it is a material transaction for them, and they have to file, and sometimes the entire document itself. So it's a great resource to find top quality M&A documents and inform yourself on the trends in the world. But we'll certainly look up some and find and send you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Sure.
Thank you, Amartya.
Thank you, Amartya. Thank you, everybody. Bye.